She didn't collapse from stress. She was poisoned, not by me, but by the man she once called a co-worker. But to understand how I know that, you need to come back with me, to that afternoon that seemed so ordinary, when she was still in the kitchen, making dinner. I remember the smell of corn and dill soup. She was stirring the pot, humming softly, the same lullaby she used to sing to our daughter. Emily was at the table, coloring, and I was reading the news, a magazine half open in my hands, and then a thud, like someone dropped a heavy sack of flour. I looked up. She was on the floor, arms out, legs limp, no sound, no movement. That sound, it wasn't just loud, it was final. It broke something, and it started everything else. Have you ever witnessed something that made no sense at the time, but later changed your entire life? Stay with me. Let me tell you from the beginning. The paramedics arrived fast, but not fast enough to calm the chaos inside me. Her eyes never opened. Not once. Her lips turned a shade of blue I'd never seen before. At St. Grace Medical Center, everything moved quickly, and too slow all at once. They wheeled her away. I wasn't allowed to follow. The only thing I heard were the machines, beeping, pulsing, cold and indifferent. When I finally saw her again, she was unrecognizable. Tubes in her throat, wires tangled like vines around her arms. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't resting. She was suspended. The doctor spoke gently, too gently, words like monitoring, critical, wait and see, the language of helplessness. But it wasn't the doctor who changed everything. It was a nurse, young, pale, barely making eye contact. She stopped me in the hallway, hands shaking just enough for me to notice. "Please," she said, voice trembling. "Bring your daughter, now." That's all she said. No explanation, no details. Just that look in her eyes, like she knew something I didn't. And in that moment, I didn't ask. I just ran. Emily was still in the waiting room. Her legs swung off the edge of the stiff vinyl couch. Her fists were clenched, white-knuckled. She didn't cry, not yet. But she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the fear had hollowed her out from the inside. "Daddy?" she asked. I just nodded, took her hand. It was ice cold, not from the air conditioning, but like her warmth had stayed behind in that kitchen, along with everything else that used to make sense. We walked in silence, down long corridors that smelled like antiseptic and bad news. The ICU doors opened with a slow hiss, and I had to force my feet forward. Then I saw her, my wife, still, pale, quiet. I'd spent 15 years memorizing that face. Now I barely recognized it beneath the mask, the tubes, the color drained from her skin. But that's not what stopped me. There was a man sitting beside her, holding her hand, whispering her name like a prayer. And when he looked up, I knew exactly who he was. Brian. That was his name, her co-worker. The one she swore was just lunch. The man I shook hands with once, at our company's holiday party. The one I'd almost forgotten because I wanted to believe her. He looked at Emily first, then at me, his voice low, soft, rehearsed. "You're her daughter?" he asked Emily gently. I stepped in front of her. My voice didn't rise. It dropped. "No," I said. "She's mine." He blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again. He didn't have a script for this part. It was quiet in the room. Too quiet. Even the machine seemed to pause. Emily clutched my hand tighter. I could feel her confusion, like static under her skin. But she didn't say a word, just stared at the man holding her mother's hand like she belonged to him. Grief is slow, but betrayal? It doesn't creep. It strikes. And in that moment, the world split clean in half, before and after. I didn't cause a scene, not for Emily, not in that room. The nurses came in, adjusted something, said things I didn't hear. Everything blurred, their voices, their faces, like I was underwater. But I remember Emily tugging gently at my sleeve. "Is Mommy gonna be okay?" Her voice cracked in the middle of okay. I looked down. I lied. I nodded, because I couldn't give her anything else. Inside, though, something collapsed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet folding in, like a house settling after an earthquake. Nothing visible, but nothing safe anymore. 15 years, shared calendars, breakfasts, bedtime stories, whispers in the dark, our baby asleep between us. her fingers tracing the edges of my jaw, telling me she'd never lie. And yet, I remembered moments. Eyes that flicked away too fast. Dinners that ran long. Laughs that stopped when I entered the room. Little things. Tiny red flags I folded into paper cranes, convinced they were harmless. Convinced she was harmless. But now, the silence in that hospital room was telling a different story, and I was finally starting to listen. That night, I didn't sleep. Emily curled up beside me on the pull-out couch in the hospital's family room. She slept like kids do, deep and without the burden of questions. But me? I stared at the ceiling tiles, one by one. I kept thinking about her hands, Lauren's hands, how they used to hold mine in the dark, how they once trembled when Emily took her first steps. Now those same hands had held his, Brian's. And suddenly my mind opened a door I'd kept locked. The note. A few weeks back, I'd found a folded piece of paper in Emily's lunchbox. Handwritten, sweet, intimate. Can't stop thinking about last night. You're my sunflower. Always. I showed it to Lauren. She laughed, said it must have been from someone else's kid, brushed it off with that easy smile of hers. And I wanted so badly to believe her that I did. But sunflower, that used to be my word. Ours. Now it was his. And now she was unconscious in a hospital bed, and I had no idea who she really was anymore. The hospital let us go home the next morning. Lauren was still unconscious. The machines did all the work. There was nothing more we could do, except wait. So I waited. But I didn't rest. Back at home, everything felt colder, quieter, like the walls knew something before I did. I walked into the garage. That was my space, the one place untouched by lies, or so I thought. My eyes landed on the toolbox she'd given me last Christmas. Steel gray, sturdy, a plaque on the front. To my forever, love, Lauren. I stared at it for a long time, ran my fingers across the engraving like it might change the meaning. Forever. I used to believe in that word. Now it sounded naive, weak. Because forever doesn't come with secrets. It doesn't flirt over text. It doesn't leave notes in lunchboxes meant for someone else. And it sure as hell doesn't collapse without warning while hiding something darker underneath. That night, I stopped grieving, and I started watching. I didn't tell anyone what I was feeling. Not my brother, not my closest friend, certainly not Emily. But inside, a switch had flipped, not out of revenge, out of instinct. Something was off, and I needed to know exactly what. So I did what I do best. I planned. No confrontations, no accusations. Just quiet movement in the background. I installed a software on her phone, invisible, undetectable. I synced her cloud account to mine, email, photos, GPS. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was strategy. At first there was silence, digital stillness. Then, it all started pouring in. Messages, photos, late-night call logs, deleted emails that weren't truly gone. She wasn't going to yoga. She wasn't at work late. Room 409, the Rosewood Inn. Again, and again, and again. And what shook me most wasn't the betrayal. It was the routine, the consistency. They were predictable, and that made them vulnerable. I didn't know what I was going to do with the truth. Not yet. But I was going to collect it. All of it. Because once you see the cracks, you can't unsee the wall collapsing. I kept digging. Every night after Emily fell asleep, I sat in the dark with only the screen's glow and the cold hum of betrayal for company. At first, I thought she was just planning to leave me, start over with him. It hurt, but it was human. But then the toxicology report came back. Lauren hadn't collapsed from stress. Her electrolytes were fine. No history of fainting. What she had in her system shouldn't have been there. A cocktail of sedatives and low-dose toxins. Easy to miss, easy to explain away, unless you were looking. I was looking. The doctors called it inconclusive. But I'd seen enough crime reports to know what inconclusive really means. You're not looking in the right direction. So I changed direction. I looked at him. Brian, not just the charming coworker. I pulled public records, restraining orders, a dead ex-girlfriend, an overdose labeled accidental. And suddenly, this wasn't just about infidelity. This was something else entirely. He wasn't just trying to take my wife. He was trying to erase her, quietly, permanently, and then he'd come for what she left behind. Emily. It hit me in waves. First disbelief, then fury, then something colder, purpose. He wasn't just seducing my wife. He was phasing her out, bit by bit, dose by dose, until she stopped waking up. And then, he'd be the one by her daughter's side, our daughter, smiling, comforting, taking over. It made my skin crawl. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the hospital, how natural he looked next to her bed, how he held Lauren's hand like it already belonged to him, how he looked at Emily, not with kindness, but with calculation. I replayed that scene over and over, because in that moment I hadn't seen it. I was too stunned, too hurt. But now I saw everything. And Lauren, I didn't know if she knew, or if she was just desperate to believe in love again, desperate enough to ignore the signs. Didn't matter. I wasn't desperate. I was done being blindsided, and I wasn't going to let my daughter become his next project, his next victim. So I did what I had to do. I started preparing for war. I didn't tell Lauren what I knew, not yet. She was still unconscious, still floating somewhere between sleep and survival. So I let the doctors do their tests, let the nurses chart vitals and adjust the IV. Outwardly, I was the concerned husband. Inwardly, I was tracking every move, every document, every name. And Brian, he kept coming to the hospital, bringing flowers, sitting by her bed when I wasn't around, comforting Emily like he belonged. It made me sick, but I stayed quiet, because by then, I knew something he didn't. He wasn't just stepping into my life, he was walking into a trap. I met with a lawyer, moved all assets into a trust under Emily's name, froze our joint accounts, updated my will, filed the first drafts of the custody petition. I even backed up the screenshots, the hotel logs, the photos, the emails, twice. He thought he was playing chess. He wasn't. He was just a piece. And I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was building something airtight, not for her, not even for me, for Emily, and for the truth. 3 days passed. Lauren still hadn't woken up. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. I wasn't. I didn't care about optimism anymore. I cared about facts. And the fact was, I needed one last thing. Something irrefutable. A moment where everything intersected. The betrayal, the manipulation, the danger. Where all their lies would collapse under their own weight. So I made a decision. I called Brian. Told him Lauren was stable. Told him I was planning a dinner. Her favorite restaurant, the hearth. Soft lights, candles. The same table we used to celebrate anniversaries. He accepted immediately. Said he'd bring flowers. Said Lauren would love it. I called the restaurant. Reserved a corner booth. I even requested the same piano track they played the night I proposed to her. Every detail, exactly as it once was, because now it would never be again. I printed everything. Photos, logs, screenshots, labeled and clipped, page by page. A different kind of bouquet, not roses, just truth. That night I shaved, wore the suit she liked, tied my tie slow, steady, because this wasn't dinner, this was the reckoning. I got there early, ordered water, no ice. My hands rested on the table like I had nothing to hide. The folder was next to me, sealed, silent, but it hummed with energy, with every betrayal it contained. Lauren arrived first. She looked thinner, worn. Her eyes darted around like she wasn't sure where she belonged. I stood, held the chair for her. Old habits die harder than trust. She smiled, weak, but it was still the smile I'd fallen for. The one that made me believe too easily, too long. Then Brian walked in, confident, relaxed, like a man who thought he'd won. He kissed Lauren on the cheek before sitting down. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. "Thanks for inviting us," he said, too casual. I nodded. Seemed like a good night to lay everything on the table. He didn't notice the weight behind those words, but she did. Lauren shifted in her seat. She looked at me for the first time like she remembered who I was. Not the man she'd lied to, but the man who'd once known her better than anyone. And just like that, the final act began. The waiter came by, asking about drinks. Brian ordered a red. Lauren asked for tea. I asked for nothing. I wasn't there to toast. I was there to end something. Before the menus even hit the table, I reached down and slid the folder forward. No build-up, no speech. Just motion, deliberate and slow, like lowering a loaded weapon between us. "You should see this," I said. Lauren's hand paused over her napkin. Brian gave a half smile, the kind men use when they think they're still in control. He opened it. The first photo was from the Rosewood, room 409. Brian entering, Lauren following, time stamped, date stamped, several dates, then screenshots, texts, the name Sunflower, the phrase always, a tone that didn't belong to friendship or office hours. Next, email records, GPS logs, receipts, then the toxicology report, and finally the petition, custody, asset freeze, restraining order. Brian stopped flipping. His hand trembled just slightly. Lauren went pale, paler than she had in the hospital, because now she wasn't hooked to wires. She was hooked to consequence. I leaned forward. "You tried to replace me," I said to her. Then I turned to him. "And you tried to erase her." Brian froze, mouth open, words dying on his tongue. He wasn't used to losing control of the room. Lauren, she didn't deny it, didn't say a word, just stared at the photos like they were pieces of a life she'd never expected to see again, her own, through someone else's eyes. The silence stretched. Finally, Brian spoke. "It's not what it looks like." I let out a breath, not a laugh, not a sigh, just finality. I'd heard that line before, from too many men, in too many court transcripts. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I took out the last page, a letter from the hospital, signed by the head nurse, verifying the toxic traces, verifying they had reported it to the authorities. I slid it across the table. "You left fingerprints," I said, "and patterns, restraining orders, dead women." Lauren's head snapped toward him. "You knew?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Couldn't. The waiter returned to take our order. No one spoke, no one ordered. Brian stood up, knocked over his glass, and walked out, fast, head down. Lauren didn't follow. She just kept crying into her napkin. He didn't say goodbye, didn't make a scene, just disappeared into the parking lot like smoke trying to outrun fire. I didn't watch him go. I'd already stopped seeing him. Lauren stayed, head down, shoulders trembling. Her tears soaked the cloth napkin she gripped like it could hold her together. For a long time, we said nothing. The room around us faded, just soft clinking glasses, low music, distant laughter from tables that hadn't burned. Finally, she looked at me. "I didn't know," she said, her voice hoarse. I believed her, but it didn't matter anymore. "You didn't want to know," I replied. That landed harder than yelling ever could. She reached across the table, fingertips twitching, maybe to explain, maybe to beg. I pulled my hands into my lap. "I already filed," I said. Her lips parted, eyes widened, but I continued steady. "The divorce, the custody, the trust, it's all in motion." And then, the last truth. "You still have a choice, Lauren." But none of them include him. I stood up, left a 50 on the table, and walked away, not from her, from who I had to become to survive her. The next morning I was at the courthouse before sunrise. The documents were already filed, but I wanted to be there. To look a judge in the eye and make sure nothing got missed. I brought everything, the evidence, the timeline, the toxicology report, the nurse's letter, my petition for full custody of Emily. There was no anger left in me, just clarity, clean, cold resolve. My lawyer reviewed it all again. "This is airtight," she said. "I know," I replied. Meanwhile, the hospital had done its part. A formal report to the police. A quiet investigation now open. Brian wasn't answering his phone, wasn't returning to work. He'd vanished like men like him always do, when the light finally reaches their shadow. Back home, I changed the locks, packed Lauren's things into boxes, left them in the garage, in the same spot where I once stared at that damn plaque. To my forever. Even the engraving seemed like mockery now, but I didn't touch it, didn't throw it away. Some lies are better left intact, not as memories, as reminders. 3 days later, Lauren woke up. No announcement, no miracle music. Just the slow blink of someone returning to a life they no longer control. A nurse called me. I waited before going in. I needed her alert, present, capable of hearing every word I was about to say. When I entered the room, she looked smaller, thinner than I remembered, weaker, but she was alive, and that was enough, for now. She tried to smile. "I didn't think I'd see you," she whispered. "You almost didn't," I said. She glanced at the IV in her arm, the monitors, the bruises from the blood work. You know? She asked, her voice barely audible. I know everything. The folder was in my hand. I dropped it on the rolling table beside her bed. She didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Brian? She asked. Gone, I said. Vanished the moment things turned real. Tears welled in her eyes. Not grief, not guilt. Just the slow collapse of a fantasy built on silence. I didn't mean, you meant enough, I cut in. And for the first time, she didn't argue. She didn't cry right away. That came later. First, she just stared. At the folder, at the wall, at me. I thought I could handle it, she finally said. Her voice was barely there. A clean line between you and him. Between what we were and what I wanted to feel again. I said nothing, because there are moments when silence speaks louder than grief ever could. He said he loved me, she added. I nodded slowly. He said the same thing to the last woman, the one who overdosed in Ohio in 2019. That hit her like a punch. Her hand went to her mouth, but I kept going, calm, measured. He didn't want you. He wanted access to your life, to your daughter, to your future. Her eyes shot to mine at that word. Your daughter? My daughter, I said, flat and final. The court agrees. So does my lawyer. The paperwork is done. But there will be visits, I said. Supervised, brief, court-mandated. She covered her face then, not to cry, to hide. But nothing was hidden anymore. Not in this room, not in this life. I stayed for a few more minutes, long enough for her to hear the silence between us, long enough for her to feel what real distance sounds like. She asked me once quietly, "Is there anything left to fix?" I looked at her. This woman I had built a life with, raised a daughter with, trusted with everything I didn't say out loud. And I answered honestly, "No, there's only what's left to protect." She nodded like she already knew, like she'd known since that night in the restaurant, but hoped the truth could still be bartered. It couldn't. I stood up, picked up the folder. Not because I needed it. I'd already made digital copies, sealed and archived, but because I didn't want her holding the weight of it. Not anymore. I hope you get better, I said at the door. For her sake. Lauren looked at me and her voice cracked. Tell her I'm sorry. I didn't promise I would, because I wasn't sure if Emily needed that, or if she even wanted it. Then I stepped out of the room and let the door close, soft, but absolute. The ride home from the hospital was quiet. No radio, no small talk. Just the sound of Emily's pencil scratching in her notebook in the back seat. She didn't ask about her mother. Not once, and I didn't offer. She'd seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. At home, she went straight to her room, curled up under the blanket with her favorite stuffed bear, the one Lauren bought her last Christmas. The tag was still on it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Lauren used to set 3 plates. Now there were only 2, and honestly, it felt safer that way. I checked my email. The court date was confirmed. The restraining order was filed. The trust was active. Emily's future had a lock on it now, not just legal, emotional. She would never know the full weight of what was nearly done to her, and that's how I wanted it. Let her remember her mother as someone who once sang lullabies, not someone who forgot how to protect. Let her rest in peace, without knowing how close she came to never resting again. That was my job now, not to punish, but to preserve. The days that followed weren't dramatic. There were no grand epiphanies, no victory laps, just routines. I made breakfast, drove Emily to school, checked the locks twice before bed. Peace didn't arrive like thunder. It came in whispers, in small things. The first time Emily laughed again, really laughed, was when she spilled juice on the kitchen floor and said, "Don't tell Mom." She froze right after, eyes wide, unsure if she was allowed to say that name. I knelt down, handed her a paper towel, and smiled. "It's okay," I said. "You can miss her and still move forward." That night, I took down the wedding photo from the hallway, not out of anger, out of honesty. We weren't that family anymore, and pretending wouldn't protect Emily. It would only confuse her. The hardest part wasn't losing Lauren. It was unlearning the instinct to include her. But slowly, I did. Room by room, word by word, memory by memory. I wasn't healing for myself. I was building something cleaner for the only person who mattered now. Emily. There was a time when every corner of the house whispered her name. Lauren was everywhere. In the scent of her shampoo on the pillow, in the calendar reminders she set months in advance, in the playlist still queued on our kitchen speaker. But now, the house began to quiet. The ghost of her wasn't gone, just quieter, less sharp around the edges. I washed the pillowcases, turned off her notifications, deleted her from the shared grocery list. It was strange how ordinary it felt. People always talk about heartbreak like it's a flood, but mine felt more like a drought. Dry, slow, a long stretch of stillness where once there was noise. Sometimes at night I'd sit in the garage again, where I first stared at that toolbox and saw the cracks. The plaque was still there, to my forever. But now I could look at it without flinching. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was just a truth that had passed. And when Emily called for me, from her bedroom or the porch or the back seat, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was doubting my own instincts, realizing how many times I'd looked away, how many signs I'd softened, reshaped, excused, because I loved her. And when you love someone, you assume they love you back the same way, fully, honestly, without hidden layers. But now I understood something I didn't before. Love without truth is just performance. It looks like commitment, but it's built on guesswork, silence, and hope that no one checks the backstage. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing it sooner. I started crediting myself for what I did once I knew. People say forgiveness is healing, but they forget the part where you have to forgive yourself first. I did that slowly. Each time I made a decision without second guessing. Each time I said no and didn't explain why. Each time I looked at Emily and didn't feel fear, only focus. Brian had vanished. Lauren had faded, but I was still here, standing in the wreckage I survived. Not because I was strong, but because I finally stopped apologizing for being sure. There's a kind of silence that feels heavy, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you miss things that maybe weren't ever real. Then there's the other kind, the kind I had now, still, clean, not empty, just clear. After Lauren left, people called, friends, her sister, even her mother. They wanted to talk, wanted answers. Some offered apologies on her behalf, others wanted details that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with gossip. I gave them nothing, because the truth wasn't public property, and because I didn't owe anyone my pain. The only person who needed the whole story already had it. Me. I had told myself the truth. I had lived it, documented it, survived it, and I didn't need to repackage it for anyone else's comfort. Not every scar is a speech. Not every ending needs a broadcast. Some stories are finished, not with fire or applause, but with a door that closes quietly and doesn't reopen. I chose that silence, and I stood by it. It started with the way she laughed again. Not the full kind, not yet, but those little giggles that sneak out before your brain can catch them. Emily was healing, not because she understood everything, but because I had stopped letting the house carry tension like static in the air. We painted her room, new colors, her choice, soft teal walls, stars on the ceiling. She asked if she could move the bed to the other corner. "Feels different," she said. "It should," I told her. Every night I tucked her in. She didn't ask where her mom was, not once. I think she knew asking would open a door neither of us was ready to walk through. And somehow, that unspoken agreement felt more intimate than words. Sometimes I'd find her drawing, tiny figures with big eyes and wide smiles. 3 of them usually, then 2. I never asked about the third, didn't need to. She was processing in her own way, and I was there, not hovering, just present. Because that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not answers, just consistency. And finally she had that again. Before all this, I used to think being a father was about presence, being at the recitals, packing lunch, asking how school went. But now I know, it's not just about being there. It's about being the ground they stand on when everything else starts to shake. That's what I became. Not a protector with rage, a foundation with purpose. Emily never asked for explanations. Children don't need facts. They need to feel safe inside the space between your words. So I gave her that. Routine, predictability, quiet strength. I stopped chasing closure from Lauren. Stopped checking the inbox for one more apology. Because my role had shifted. I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't even a man picking up broken pieces. I was her father, uncomplicated, unshakable. And every time she reached for my hand without hesitation, every time she fell asleep without fear, that truth settled deeper inside me. She didn't need the version of me who doubted. She needed the version who endured. And now, I was that man. Brian never resurfaced. No emails, no calls, no threats. It was like he evaporated the moment the spotlight turned on. Men like him don't fight the truth. They flee from it. I checked once, just to be sure. He'd cleaned out his apartment, left his job, closed social accounts. Gone. And Lauren? She sent letters. At first, every week, then once a month. Now, maybe a card on Emily's birthday, if that. I didn't read them. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need anything from her anymore. Not words, not guilt, not explanation. Emily saw her once, in a supervised setting arranged by the court. They sat across from each other in a cold room. Lauren cried. Emily didn't. Afterward, on the ride home, I asked how she felt. She shrugged. I don't think she knows who I am anymore, she said. Then turned to look out the window, calm, almost free. That's when I knew. Sometimes the healing doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from absence, from letting the wrong people fade until they're just names we stop saying out loud. Peace didn't announce itself. It arrived in pieces, subtle, earned, like the first Saturday morning that didn't feel heavy. Emily slept in. I made pancakes. No silence that needed explaining. We planted flowers in the backyard. She chose marigolds. Bright, resilient. They smell like sunshine, she said, and I believed her. There were no big speeches. No look how far we've come. Just a quiet rhythm forming beneath the ruins. Sometimes I caught myself smiling, in the car, at the store, brushing my teeth. Not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because nothing awful had. That's what healing really is. Not the return of what you lost, but the slow discovery of what was waiting underneath the wreckage. There were still echoes of her voice, of that night, of what could have happened if I hadn't acted, but they were distant now, muted. What filled the house instead was Emily's laughter, the rustle of her sketches, the hum of a life still unfolding. Not perfect, not untouched, but real. And real, I learned, is enough. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. No date worth remembering. No dramatic trigger. I just woke up and didn't think about her. Not once. No heaviness in my chest. No questions left unanswered. No imaginary conversations in the shower. Just stillness. The kind that doesn't demand attention. It simply exists. I got Emily ready for school. She wore mismatched socks and didn't care. We laughed about it. She kissed my cheek before running to the bus. And I stood there on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the quiet street, feeling a kind of peace I'd once thought was gone for good. I didn't forgive Lauren. I didn't forget. But I wasn't carrying her anymore. The betrayal had been the fire, but I'd walked through it, and all that remained now was clean ground. I didn't need to rebuild what we had. I needed to build something new. For Emily, for myself, without ghosts in the foundation. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was simply living. I used to define myself by what I gave. Provider, partner, planner. The man who made sure everything ran smoothly. Birthdays remembered, groceries stocked, laundry folded, emotions quietly managed. I thought that made me strong, reliable. But I've learned real strength isn't about holding everything together. It's about knowing when to let things break. When to stop fixing and start protecting what still matters. I'm not the same man I was a year ago. Not better, not worse, just clearer. I no longer explain my boundaries. I no longer soften truths to keep the peace. I trust my instincts now, the same ones I once doubted because loving her made me question myself. Never again. Emily once asked me, "Were you scared?" I looked her in the eye and told her the truth. Yes, but I didn't let fear decide. And that, I think, is who I became. Not the man who lost everything. Not the one who got revenge. But the man who stood still while everything fell apart and refused to fall with it. People think survival is about strength, force, volume, making noise when you're hurt. But I learned something different. Sometimes survival is about waiting, not passively, precisely. When Lauren collapsed, everything in me wanted to scream, to accuse, to rip the mask off right there in the hospital. But I didn't. Not because I was calm, but because I understood something vital. Truth without timing is just chaos. So I waited. I documented. I moved my pieces, one at a time. I let them think they were ahead, let them get comfortable in the lie. Because timing isn't just patience, it's strategy, it's discipline. It's knowing that silence is sometimes the sharpest weapon. When I finally showed them the truth, they didn't have time to run, not from the evidence, not from themselves. And in that final moment, I wasn't emotional. I was exact. That's what saved Emily. Not rage, not pride, precision, and I'll never again apologize for choosing timing over noise. I used to think justice looked like courtrooms, gavels, guilty verdicts, punishment, but now I know better. Justice, for me, looked like Emily sleeping soundly in the next room. It looked like unopened letters in the trash, like restraining orders quietly upheld. Like a man, me, standing between a little girl and the ghosts that almost rewrote her future. I didn't need Lauren to suffer. I didn't need Brian to rot in a cell. I needed them gone, out of reach, out of power, out of our lives. People always ask, don't you want closure? But closure isn't something someone gives you. It's a line you draw, a door you lock, and a key you throw into a place so deep you forget how to want it back. Justice wasn't about winning. It was about ending, cleanly, completely. No drama, no revenge, just boundaries with no doors left open. And in that quiet space they left behind, I started building something better, not louder, not harsher, just safer, for her, for me, for good. I don't pretend it didn't happen. That would be a lie. And I've had enough of those. There are still moments. A song on the radio, the way Emily tilts her head when she concentrates, a recipe card in Lauren's handwriting tucked in the back of a drawer. Memories don't ask permission, they just arrive. Uninvited, but not always unkind. And I've learned not to fight them. I just decide what to do with them now. I don't romanticize the past anymore. I don't look back and edit the good parts to soften the bad. But I also don't hate all of it. We built a life once. We raised a child. We shared real moments, even if some were surrounded by lies. So I remember what's worth keeping. Emily's first birthday, snow days by the fire, Lauren humming while folding laundry, back when I still believed her silence meant peace. I don't carry it all, only what fits in the kind of future we're building now, a future rooted in truth. Even if that truth came late, even if it came with scars, because scars at least are honest. Scars don't ask for your attention, they don't scream. They sit quietly, waiting for the day you notice they've stopped hurting. I used to trace mine. Not the physical kind, but the emotional ones. Late at night, when the house was still, when the silence echoed louder than any memory. I used to wonder if I'd ever feel normal again, if I'd laugh without checking my phone, if I'd trust a smile, or even myself. But the thing about scars is, they don't mean you're broken. They mean you healed the hard way. Now when I touch the places where it hurt, Lauren's empty side of the bed, the kitchen table with one chair missing, the way Emily sometimes goes quiet when she sees a family of 3, I don't feel pain. I feel proof. Proof that we made it. That the worst happened, and we didn't fall apart. We adapted, adjusted, survived. And one day, without even realizing it, we started living again. Not because the scars faded, but because they stopped bleeding. I didn't think I'd ever let someone in again. Not really. Not past the surface. It wasn't fear. It was fatigue. The kind that settles in your bones after too much pretending, too much rebuilding. But time has a way of softening hard edges. There's someone now. We met through a school fundraiser, Emily's art teacher. Her name is Claire. She doesn't ask about Lauren. She doesn't tiptoe around the gaps. She just shows up, kind, steady. The first time she stayed for dinner, Emily made her laugh so hard she nearly dropped her fork. I watched them from across the table, not as a man chasing replacement, but as a father watching the light come back into his daughter's eyes. It's early. It's simple. It's not about fireworks. It's about ease. And that's how I know it's real. Because love isn't loud when it's honest. It's gentle. It's patient. It doesn't rush into empty spaces. It waits for them to be ready. And for the first time in years, I think I am. Emily's stronger than I ever was at her age. Maybe stronger than I was at any age. She doesn't talk about the past much. Doesn't ask questions she knows I won't answer, but every now and then, she'll say something small, and it stops me cold. Like the other night, she was brushing her teeth, and out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you think people can unlove someone?" I paused, wiped my hands on a towel, met her eyes in the mirror. "I think," I said, Sometimes they never really loved them in the first place. She nodded once, then went back to rinsing, like it was just another question, like she already knew the answer. She sees things now. Not with suspicion, but with awareness. She notices when people say one thing and mean another. When kindness is practiced, not real. When love is a show instead of a promise. And part of me hates that she had to learn it so early. But most of me is proud, because she didn't become bitter. She became sharp. And through her eyes, I see the man I had to become, and the father I'm still becoming. There was a time when I measured everything in damage, how much was lost, how badly it hurt, how long it would take to rebuild. Now, I measure by distance, how far we've come, how far Emily can run now without looking back, how far I've moved from needing closure, from needing her. The wreckage is still there in a way, scattered memories, photos in boxes I haven't opened, emails I never deleted but never read again. But we're not buried in it. We walk past it now. Like an old neighborhood you don't need to visit anymore. Claire's here more often now. She helps Emily with her science projects. They bake together, burn things, laugh, try again. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And me? I don't look over my shoulder anymore. I don't rehearse what I'd say if Lauren ever called because I know I wouldn't answer. That chapter's sealed, not erased, just closed. We didn't just survive the fire. We built a new life with the ashes. And somehow, that life feels lighter, not because nothing's broken, but because nothing's hidden. I used to clap for things I didn't believe in. Birthdays that felt hollow. Anniversaries staged like theater. Moments where I smiled wide but felt nothing inside. Love back then was performance. We played the roles, said the right lines, paused for applause. But now there are no scripts, no acts, no curtain calls, just us. Emily drawing in the sunroom, Claire humming while folding laundry, me cooking dinner with both feet planted on solid ground. No second guesses, no flinches when the phone rings, no passwords hidden or eyes that dart away. It's quiet, not the kind of quiet that follows disaster, the kind that grows when there's nothing left to fear. Sometimes I catch myself standing still in the middle of a room, not overwhelmed, not anxious, just present. And that's how I know I made it. Not out of revenge, not out of survival, out of truth, out of endurance, out of choosing something real over something rehearsed. The performance is over. The mask is gone. And for the first time in years, so is the audience. This is my life now, and no one's clapping, because no one needs to. I don't regret what I did. Not the investigation, not the confrontation, not even the silence that followed. What I regret is believing that love was enough without proof, that trust didn't need confirmation, that faith could replace clarity. I know better now. When Lauren fell, it looked like tragedy, but it was revelation. The truth didn't explode. It unfolded, layer by layer, word by word, lie by lie. And when it was all exposed, I didn't rage. I didn't retaliate. I acted, with patience, with precision, with purpose. Because betrayal taught me something love never could. That protecting your peace sometimes means sacrificing your comfort. That timing is power. And that silence can be the loudest move you ever make. I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I just waited. And when the board was set, I made one move. Undeniable, irreversible, final, checkmate. And now Emily is safe. Now the story is over. Not because they apologized. Not because they paid, but because I walked away with everything they tried to steal, and gave it back to the one person who never asked me to prove anything. My daughter.